Hello. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about the costs of setting up a saltwater tank and the huge variance and range in which, for the demands, cost, and just generally a lot of misinformation that's put out there about saltwater tanks. Obviously, if you're looking at something like having a semblance of a fully active reef, lots of corals, tangs, angels, clownfish, and a whole fully active reef, then yes, so you better plan on spending, a couple $1,000s in order to get something like that set up. Now, that said, however, there are a number of individuals out there who are perfectly content with, say, a pair of clownfish and maybe another couple of smaller, brightly colored and active fish in a relatively smaller tank that's more manageable. For this reason, today I'm going to kind of do a breakdown of the costs of setting up what is known as a fish only with live rock 20-gallon long tank, which is considered a great size for a beginner getting in saltwater, and kind of do a breakdown of the costs, and then do a kind of comparison between that and, say, a 10-gallon freshwater tank that I set up recently at work. The the thing to remember with saltwater is that corals add a whole different degree of maintenance, upkeep, and cost to your tank. So if you're able to forego the corals, or at least forego them for start and maybe add them later after you gain some more experience, it puts you into a totally different realm in terms of the ease and maintenance. Because a lot of people will tell you, oh, you absolutely have to go with a freshwater tank. Well, with the tank I'm going to tell you how to set up here, I would be perfectly comfortable recommending that to somebody who had absolutely zero experience in setting up a saltwater tank. Okay, so here's the breakdown as follows for setting up, say, a 20-gallon long with maybe 4 fish, like a pair of clowns, maybe a royal grama, and maybe a sand sifting goby of some kind, which would be a brightly colored and fairly active tank for you. So here's the breakdown as follows. First and foremost, the 20 long, you can pick up an Aqueon 20 long from Petco at one of their dollar per gallon sales for $20. After that, I recommend getting a test kit. I am not a fan of the API test kits. There's a real shocker if you've seen my other video. And would recommend for a marine test kit to go with Red Sea. It is probably the most accurate and comprehensive test kit you can get in the marine environment for the money. That isn't to say there aren't some other good test kits out there. There are. But generally you're buying the separate kit, and you're going to get nickel and dime to death by the time you even get the ammonia, nitrate, nitrite, the usual, the big three, as it were, for initial testing. In addition, the Red Sea test kit also has one for pH and alkalinity, which should help you out later down the road if you decide to go the coral route. Back on track. For the 20 long, you can use a hang-on back filter. I've used, on my 36-gallon bow front, I used a Fluval 50. I would recommend the same filter for the 20 long. You can pick them up online from PetSmart for about $35 with the discounts and promotions for ordering online and then picking them up in store. For $50, you can pick up a Jabao wave maker. That would be the equivalent of your wave maker power head to create and simulate the underwater currents that the fish are going to need in the tank. That would be sufficient for fish, not a problem. It'll give them enough current in the tank that size. You can pick them up from Amazon for about $50. The next one is, a lot of times you'll hear about dry rock and live rock. Dry rock is basically live rock that has died off. The advantage to it is that it is significantly cheaper to buy than live rock. So you can pick up a 40-pound box of the dry rock for between $50 and $80 on Amazon. And what you would do is you would just use half of that amount, because you only need about 20 pounds. And then if you wanted to, you could either sell off the other half, take it to your local fish store and work out some kind of exchange with them. Or, better yet, find a partner to go in with you on their own 20-gallon build and split the cost, which would thereby reduce your cost by that much more. For $20, you can generally pick up like a 100-watt, 150-watt tank heater that is marine compatible. You do want to make sure that on the box it says, for freshwater and marine environments, basically stating it's okay for use in saltwater, because sometimes if they don't specify that, it's kind of a gamble, because sometimes they'll put certain coatings on there that can get corroded in saltwater, and you definitely don't want that in your tank. For $8 to $13, you can get a siphon hose. If you've already got, had freshwater experience, chances are you've already got one of those. If you don't, then you will need to pick one up. For $22, you get a refractometer. That'll measure the salinity in your water, which is a good idea to check from time to time. You want to make sure that the salinity is not getting too high or too low, because remember, as water evaporates with saltwater tanks, your salinity increases because the water evaporates, but the salt doesn't. Okay. For about $28, it'll give you 4 5-gallon jugs, the water-safe jugs that are sealable. And you'll want that because what I would recommend for a tank this small, if you've got the option, is to just buy the pre-mixed salts and RODI water from your local fish store. It'll take a lot of the hassle out of the process for you, and it'll save you a huge initial cost on setting up an RODI system. You don't want to use tap water. Tap will produce all kinds of nasty nuisance algae that'll make it a real pain for you in the long run, so just don't use it. $30 to $40, I would say, would cover the cost of your LED light. You don't need anything fancy for fish in a saltwater tank. It's corals that are very demanding on lighting, as well as, say, something like a bubble tip anemone. I'm not a fan of anemones. I know people are like, oh, clownfish, you gotta have an anemone. You don't need one. Just trust me. The captive bred clownfish a lot of times don't even know what to do with an anemone, and most of the fish you find these days that are clownfish are captive bred, so don't even bother with it. Don't worry about it, and you'll save yourself a whole lot of cost and hassle. I recommend always picking up a couple of those, 5-gallon Homer's Home Depot buckets. They're about $3 a piece, so about $6 there for a couple of those. Once your tank gets cycled, getting a Chemi Pure Elite bag, which costs about $15, $16, would be incredibly beneficial. It helps reduce phosphates in your tank, because it's a combination of carbon and GFO, or a granulated ferric oxide, which helps reduce phosphates in there, and in turn helps keep all that nasty algae down. About $10 to $15 is what you're going to spend for some bacteria and a source of ammonia. Make sure the source of ammonia is pure and it's not like mixed in with a bunch of other stuff, though, because you definitely don't want that in your tank. That would be what you're going to use between the bacteria and the source of ammonia to help seeding and starting the bacteria and the nitrogen cycle in the saltwater tank with the dry rock. Or if you want to, what you can do is get a small little tiny piece of live rock from your local fish store and use that to seed the bacteria on the dry rock that you purchased. So you'll also want some form of a top on your tank. All fish jump. I don't care what anybody says. They will at some point attempt to jump, and so you do want to have some form of cover. $20 is what I checked on Amazon, is what it would cost for you to get a screen top for your tank. You would need to cut just a little hole out there for where the hang-on back filter goes, but other than that, it would be fine. And that'll keep the fish where they belong in your tank. So, calculating all these costs out, I've come up with a range of $362 to $415 to set this up. Now, you might be sitting there looking at sticker shock and going, oh my gosh, that's ridiculously expensive. Well, let me put this in perspective for you. I recently set up a 10-gallon glowfish tank at my work, and it cost me, by the time I was ready to add fish, $150 to set, and that was just to set up a 10-gallon freshwater tank. That included, the cost of the gravel, a couple little decorations that I threw in there, the cost of having to upgrade the lighting because it didn't distribute the lighting evenly the way a light bar would. The cost of the chemicals that I needed to use to treat the water, the tank heater, and and of course the cost of the tank kit itself. So by the time all was said and done, and the drain hose and the buckets. So by the time all was said and done, I had spent $150 on that. And keep in mind, that is for a tank that is not only freshwater, but it's also half the size of a 20 long. And so, when you put it into that kind of perspective, it's not as far of a stretch, in my opinion, as it seems for some other people. Because a lot of people, would think nothing for, a 20 to 30 gallon tank by the time all the components were said and done, even for a freshwater setup, spending $200 to $300 anyways. So when you put it in that context, as I said, a fish only with live rock tank, something like a pair of clownfish, maybe a Royal Grandma basslet, or, a pygmy or possum wrasse, those are great as well. And a sand sifting goby, like a yellow watchman goby. You're really not as far off the mark as you might think. And the way I've given you for setting it up is much easier than a lot of saltwater configurations, and it's a lot less hassle, and it really isn't that much more maintenance than, say, a smaller freshwater tank. Nor is it extremely more costly. Now, the fish themselves are going to be more expensive in saltwater, but all the fish that I've listed to you, other than with the exception of the possum wrasse or pygmy wrasses, they tend to be a little more expensive, like in the $45 to $50 a piece range. Clownfish, generally, they'll run between about $20 and $35 a piece, unless you get the really, fancy high-end ones in terms of the Ocellaris and Percula varieties, which is what I recommend sticking to. The others are just too big and too mean. In addition to that, the not the diamond watchman goby, say the yellow watchman goby, about $20 to $25 a piece for those things. And the Royal Grandma basslet, same thing, about $20 to $25 a piece. They're not, for saltwater standard, they're not ridiculously expensive fish. You're not going to be spending three figures on a fish like you will with some of the bigger ones. So anyways, that's just kind of an idea out there, because in my opinion, there's a lot of misinformation put out about saltwater tanks, that they're ridiculously hard, they're ridiculously complex, and the truth is, it all depends on what you want to do with saltwater. As I said, if you're looking for that super fancy active reef with these big active fish and lots of corals all over the place, then yeah, I plan on spending a couple of grand. But, as I said, if you're content with a couple of clownfish and a couple of other smaller brightly colored fish, you can set up a 20 long for, under $400 to just over $400 for the cost of getting it set to add fish, to getting it up and running. So, anyways, that's all I have to say, and thanks for watching.